Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In this episode of Cases from the Past, I cover the case of John Cooper and his crime spree that left many local Pembrokeshire residents and tourists in fear. I hope you enjoy. The Pembrokeshire Coastal Path is a national trail in southwest Wales. It runs for 186 miles and offers idyllic views for both locals and tourists alike. The trail is unique, as it covers all types of coastal landscape, from beaches to cliffs and coves. It was these idyllic views and landscapes that pulled Peter and Gwenda Dixon to the area. They were from Oxfordshire and had been camping in the area as they loved the outdoors and walking. It was on July 2nd of 1989 that their son Tim would report the couple, who were in their 50s, missing. They hadn't returned from their camping holiday to the Pembrokeshire coast, and they had last been seen on June 29th, having left a caravan park at 9:30 to walk along the coastal trail. It would be on July 5th that they were found, but not alive like most who go missing. They had been murdered. Peter Dixon's hands had been restrained behind his back. His wife Gwenda had been sexually assaulted. The news of the murders shocked their son Tim and the police. Just who had murdered this couple? The killer had concealed their bodies along the trail, and an appeal for information was put out the day following the body discoveries. It wouldn't take long before a lead came in. It was of a suspicious man who had been seen in the area. A sketch was drawn and released, and it matched to the suspect, who had been seen withdrawing money from Peter Dixon's account. In total, the suspect had withdrawn £350. The murders had been carried out in a cold and calculating manner. The suspect had held the couple up with a shotgun and demanded money, obtaining Peter Dixon's bank card. He had then sexually assaulted Mrs. Dixon before brutally executing the couple, shooting Peter 3 times and Gwenda twice. News of the double murder spread across the local community. Many were frightened and in a state of paranoia, as the killer was presumably a local who knew the area well. As the investigation began, behind the scenes, police were empty-handed when it came to identifying a suspect. Theories ran wild, as one that was put forth was that the couple had stumbled upon an IRA weapons cache, and this was the reason that they'd been killed. But police weren't buying it. It was pretty absurd, and a more logical answer was more likely. This answer came in the form of another case. The case bore a similarity to another double murder 4 years before. That case occurred near the town of Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. At the time, it was unsolved. The case concerned a murder of a brother and sister in their farmhouse. The killer had executed Richard and Helen Thomas on December the 22nd of 1985. Through analysing the crime scene, it appeared like the killer was disturbed by Helen Thomas as he broke into their home. Years later, it would emerge that the killer had actually known the couple. He had purchased hay from Richard Thomas and worked nearby as a farm labourer. It was speculated that the killer may have known that Mrs. Thomas would be home alone, and so went into the house with sexual and murderous intent. Helen Thomas had been sexually assaulted and shot. The killer then waited for her brother Richard to arrive home before shooting him. He then poured diesel all around the house and burned it down. In an area with a very low crime rate, this case stood out. Still, despite over 150 investigators being involved in it, it remained unsolved. The years came and went as public tips and leads were looked into for both cases. These went nowhere. In 1996, 5 teenagers had been walking through a field near Milford Haven when a man wearing a balaclava and brandishing a shotgun appeared from the bushes and ordered them to the ground. He demanded money from the teens, but they didn't have any. Receiving threats from the masked man, they complied with his request to lay on the floor and stare at the ground. The masked man then restrained them with rope. He then kidnapped 2 girls from the group, one was 16 and one was 15, and took them to an isolated area. He threatened the girls with a knife, before raping the 16-year-old and indecently assaulting the 15-year-old. Before fleeing, he would return to the other teens and threaten them before firing his shotgun in the air to intimidate them further. This serious incident went unsolved. In the late 90s, police were working an operation known as Operation Huntsman. The operation had been set up to solve the many residential burglaries and one-armed robbery in and around Pembrokeshire. The investigation had them focusing in on a local man named John Cooper, their prime suspect for these crimes. He had a pretty unique history. having won a Spot the Ball competition in 1978. He won £90,000, which is the equivalent of more than £500,000 today, and a car even came with the prize money. However, like many people who win big money, John Cooper squandered his winnings, a once-in-a-lifetime win gone down the drain. This was in part because of a gambling addiction and bad financial decisions on his part. Police were confident that John Cooper had subsequently took up home burglaries as he quit his job upon winning big. Police were also confident in their belief that John Cooper was the one responsible for both of the double murders in the 1980s. However, despite them having actually interviewed him following the crimes, and this was to question local people who may have witnessed anything, there was no physical evidence tying him to them. Only circumstantial evidence existed, and this wasn't going to help secure a conviction. Doing a bit of background checking on Cooper, police learned that he'd been employed at the National Trust, so this gave him perfect access to pick out victims in remote parts of the coastal trail. However, when it came to his involvement in both double murders, he'd given what was described as plausible explanations that were ultimately backed up by his family. It turned out that on the same day as the discovery of Mr. and Mrs. Dixon's bodies, he had sold Mr. Dixon's wedding ring to a jeweller for £25. The news of Cooper selling a ring to a local jeweller had been raised to the attention of the police in 1989, but because of his plausible explanation, the ring's origins were not thoroughly looked into. Cooper would ultimately end up convicted of 30 burglaries and one armed robbery in 1998. Operation Huntsman was a success and would have Cooper sentenced to 14 years as police searched his home for additional evidence that could possibly tie him to the unsolved murders and unsolved rape of the 16-year-old girl in 1996. The advancements in forensics would prove to be the most beneficial part of this case. Between 1998 and 2005, investigators confiscated items from Cooper's rented home and sent them off for forensic testing. Items of clothing like a pair of gloves and balaclava were tested. Along with this was a shotgun that had been found near to the scene of an armed robbery. Items of clothing found near his home in Hedges were also located, and these were also sent for forensic testing in hopes that they belonged to some of his victims and could provide forensic matches. It appeared like Cooper had thrown them in the hedges for concealment. Forensic testing takes time though, and it would take years before solid confirmation emerged from tests done on the confiscated items. In 2006, a cold case review to try to solve the 1980s murders was set up. By this stage, Cooper was the prime suspect. The police investigation looked into serious unsolved crimes in Pembrokeshire. Given that all of the most serious crimes took place in a very small radius, the same offender was likely responsible for all of the crimes. The case against John Cooper was beginning to build up as evidence was mounting and his crime MO was being established. Still, no forensic breakthroughs had come just yet. April 2009 would prove to be the month that major breakthroughs came in the cases. The test results came back and provided a link between the murders of the Dixons and John Cooper. Mr. Dixon's blood was located on the shotgun used by Cooper in an unrelated armed robbery, and traces of Mr. Dixon's DNA were found on the shorts from Cooper's bedroom, which turned out to belong to Mrs. Dixon. Clothing from the Hedges discovered near to Cooper's home turned out to belong to the Dixons also. Fibres from the other crime scenes also proved a match to John Cooper. Cooper now faced more charges. He'd been released from prison in early 2009, but was now back behind bars facing more serious charges. At his trial, which lasted 8 weeks, the prosecution presented a troublesome picture of John Cooper. It emerged that he had appeared on the popular UK game show Bullseye 3 weeks before the murders of Richard and Gwenda Dixon. Whilst on the game show, he is asked about his hobbies, which included scuba diving on the Pembrokeshire coast. The appearance on the game show helped to aid prosecutors in tying Cooper to the murders of Richard and Gwenda. The suspect from the ATM withdrawal mirrored Cooper, and this further helped secure a conviction. More information regarding Cooper and his activities would surface at his trial. His son explained how Cooper would leave their home at night with his shotgun, and how he burned stolen jewellery in his garden in an attempt to locate valuable stones. Cooper was interested in survivalism and conducted his crimes in a very methodical manner, and this could be seen in his MO. He restrained his victims and demanded PIN numbers whilst his identity was obscured. His motivations were both financial and sexual, and he went about his crimes in a violent manner, targeting victims in remote areas and fooling them into submission for a robbery ruse. Cooper was convicted of both double murders, the attempted robberies of the teens in 1996 and the rape of the teenage girl during the same incident, and he was given a life sentence in May 2011. Finally, John Cooper was behind bars. Forensic science helped to secure his conviction. Still, he had been suspected of the murders way back in 1998. Even local people believed that he was the culprit, yet there was no concrete evidence tying him to the crimes at that time. Fortunately, he was imprisoned before he could victimise other people. This has been the Cases from the Past episode on John Cooper. As always, thank you for watching.